Hello everyone, Daniel Yuck here. Thank you all for tuning in today. I appreciate you. In today's video, I want to share with you all some tips and tricks and my approach on how I go about perfecting my tattoo lines. Within this video, I am going to be as thorough as I possibly can be. I'm going to explain as much as I can. By the end of this video, you will be well acquainted and have some practical practices that you can implement on your end to better your tattooing lines. Should you have any questions at any point throughout this video, I'm going to highly encourage you to drop a comment down below. I will do my absolute best to assist you in the best possible direction. I also have social medias under the same name as this YouTube channel. I would truly appreciate your support over there as well. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button for me and ring that bell, as I'm going to be bringing more videos like this for you all. Should you find my content helpful and enjoy my YouTube channel, consider becoming a Patreon or sending over a super thanks, as I would truly appreciate your support. With that being said, let's go ahead and dive straight on into this. When it comes to tattooing lines, there are a number of things that I am considering that allows me to pull nice, clean, consistent, saturated lines. I'm going to begin with floating information right here. I'm actually going to put some information on the screen. For me, some top variables that I am considering when it comes to nice, clean, consistent, saturated lining. I'm thinking of my comfortability with my setup. How acquainted am I with my setup? Do I know my setup in and out? Do I know the vibration of my machine? Do I know how it feels running at 5 volts? Do I know how it feels at 8? Do I know where my lighting sweet spots are? Do I know where my shading voltage sweet spots are? You kind of get my logic behind that. So how comfortable are we with our gear is one of the fundamental variables that I'm considering when it comes to tattooing lines. And I know it may be a little bit out of place, but just bear with me. This will all start tying in together. Being comfortable with our setup comes back to being mindful of what we are utilizing on our end. Coils tend to hit harder, so therefore we run at a lower voltage to line. Rotary tattoo machines, say with like a 3.5 stroke, tends to hit a bit softer, so we tend to run more at 7.5 or 8 volts. What if we were to translate the rotary setting for the voltage at around 7.5 to 8 to a coil machine? Then we're going to be ripping through skin, and this is where problems happen. So this is the main reason why we want to be acquainted with the gear that we are using. This is the main reason why we want to invest the time into finding out the sweet spots and what's right for us. I hope this can shed some light as to why understanding and being comfortable with the gear that we are using is important. Another fundamental variable that I am considering when it comes to nice, clean, consistent lines is my hand speed and voltage. And again, going back to the comfortability with our setup, I can't align my hand speed and voltage if I'm not comfortable with the gear that I am using. Hand speed and voltage is just as important as all of the variables that I'm explaining to you here today. So right now we have comfortability with our gear, we have hand speed and voltage. Another variable that I am considering is my ink flow, and not only that, the ink type. So those are two different variables on their own. Please keep in mind that some inks are made a lot more thicker than others. So if we're just kind of like blindly choosing tattoo inks to tattoo with, then we may end up with results that we don't want, and or just make our tattooing experience much more harder than it needs to be. So I would recommend, if you're going to be, say, focusing on lettering, and then get an ink that is dedicated and tailored to lettering style tattoos. Another example, if you're going to be doing tattoos dominantly around shading, then go ahead and invest into some shading ink that's going to benefit your wants and needs. And this all kind of goes back to being comfortable with our setup. Everything that we choose to use, we're going to want to meticulously choose it all because of A and B, because of C. You get the idea. We want to have a critical thought process behind the gear that we are using, so that way when we are using this gear, we can anticipate the results. Some other variables that I consider are the lines and the directions. If I'm going to be tattooing, I don't really want to pull a line in a direction that I'm not comfortable with. I always want to adjust my posture based around the lines that I am doing. I always want to match the line weights as well, so I always want to pick a needle size that's closest to the line weight that I need to tattoo. And I'm always thinking about my needle depth as well. I always want to avoid going too deep, as I don't want the design to lose its integrity over time, and or I don't want to blow the client out. Everything will be floating right here, so that way you can take all this information in on your end. I really recommend to kind of pause and absorb this information, so that way we can kind of be on the same page throughout this video. Now that I've gone over some critical thinking, my logic, and my thought process, allow me to get more into the technical aspect of pulling nice, clean, consistent, saturated lines. For this demonstration, I'm going to be demonstrating with a blank piece of fake skin to prove some points. And I'm also going to be demonstrating with this Mandala. I am using a Reelskin fake skin. Links will be for you in the description below. Here I have a different assortment of needles that match the appropriate line weights for this specific design. Right here I have a 45 round shader. I have an 111 round shader, forgive me. I have a Quelle 14 round shader. I have a Stigma 5 round liner, and I have a CNC Police 3 round liner. When I was creating this design initially, I was already putting thought into the line weights that I personally wanted to be using throughout this tattoo, and this is kind of what I anticipated. These bolder lines right here are going to be with the Inkclaw 111 round shader, and then I'm going to do these little lines right here that are a lot less thicker than that one, but they're still kind of bold. I'm going to do those with a 14 round shader, the Quelle 14 round shader for those right there. And then for these, I may use a 14 round shader as well for those. Maybe for all of this line work in here, I think the 14 round shader will be good. And then for all of these smaller floral details in there, I was probably going to go with a 5 round liner or a 7 round liner long taper. I could even do a 9 round liner in there, and then in here I could either do a 3 round liner or a 5 round liner. So you get the idea and logic behind what I am going for. You get my thought process behind choosing the line weights that are most accurate to what the design is telling me. I personally feel this all does tie in to clean, perfect, consistent, saturated lines because we are planning out the tattoos. We're not going to have to wing anything. We know exactly what line weight is for what. We know exactly what we need to do, which is a position we want to be in when we are tattooing. For those who are curious, I'm going to be using the AI Tinnitus Profit T100. I'm going to be using this Inkclaw Tiny Tattoo pin as well to demonstrate my points here. When it comes to tattooing perfect lines, knowing the technical side, I feel, of tattooing a line is only half the battle. Another half of the battle is a physical aspect where we are comfortable enough to hold our gear from point A to B without wobbling too much throughout the entire line. I understand that we are not robots. Keep in mind that tattoos aren't necessarily perfect. However, we still want to do the absolute best job that we can possibly do. That's not to say that there won't be a few wobbles within some lines that we are doing, and if there is, be kind to yourself, understand that that is completely okay. And the mistakes that we do make along the way, those are perfect examples as to why we are investing the time of learning tattooing on fake skin. Now, with that being said, let's get into holding a tattoo machine, and this is going to vary from artist to artist. For me personally, when I hold a machine, it kind of fluctuated throughout my time of tattooing. This year in April marks the 3rd year that I've been tattooing, and in that time frame, I've kind of gone into different postures to see what worked best for me, to see the finished results within my tattooing, and to kind of just feel out different ways to tattoo. And for me personally, I've developed a couple of ways that I feel comfortable holding my machines. I'm going to actually demonstrate here with you all. Here is the Quelle 14 round shader. So over the years, when I first started, I remember I started in a way that was kind of safe. I used to play it very, very safe when I first started tattooing. And by playing it safe, what I mean by that is I would use my middle finger often to stabilize my needle throughout my lining. So this is what it would look like. So let's imagine here I'm going to tattoo from this point to this point. Then I would get my finger right here, and you'll see where I made tutorials showing you all how I hold my machine. And I'll simply place my hand down comfortably, find my appropriate angle and get comfortable, and then from there I'm gonna just simply navigate throughout the line as best as I can. And then when I got comfortable, I would just taper out and then taper back in if I needed to. So that is how I used to hold my machine. And I've also fluctuated throughout my time of holding my machine, let's say in more tough areas I've noticed that have more curves. I would tend to hold my machine in a bit of a different manner, like so. So I would use my pinky as a base, as you can see, and then I would use my ring finger on my right hand as a way to hold the machine, like so. And then I would guide it like this on curvature areas, on areas with, curves to it. And this felt a lot more natural and comfortable over this. And this is going to vary from artist to artist. Keep in mind, you may tattoo in a completely different style and or way, and that is completely fine. This is just how I've found stability throughout my time with tattooing. Being comfortable in general is going to help us in the long run throughout our tattooing process. We want to be as comfortable as we can throughout the process. We want to be as planned and as ready for the designs and tattoos that we are taking on. What I want to do now is I want to take some time and I want to share with you all what it's like to approach lining incorrectly, so that way we are acquainted and kind of know what to look for when we are tattooing. Another important variable to consider when we want to get clean, nice, consistent lines is our needle hang. So sometimes on some needles, or most needles, when we tend to hang our needle out too far, we'll get a needle wobble. And even though we're pulling straight, clean lines and our technical application was correct, the needles could still tend to wobble out of place. So you're going to want to go ahead and take some time and play with your needle hang and figure out what's right for you. So for me personally, I like to pull lines with a needle hang. I like to actually hang my needle out quite a bit. So for me, I feel like somewhere around here is going to be great for me. It's going to be to each their own, everyone's different, but kind of mess with the settings and figure out what's right for you. But that's also an important variable to consider when we're trying to pull clean, consistent, straight lines. Right now, I am running at 7.5 volts with the Profit T100. I'm using the Quelle 14 round shader just to refresh our memory. And I want to demonstrate the improper practice of my hand speed and voltage being unaligned. So this is what it would look like when I'm tattooing, and let's say if I wasn't aware of the fundamentals, again, such as hand speed and voltage, if I'm going to be tattooing, this is kind of what it would look like. As soon as the needle hits the skin, I think that I have to kind of go to work on the skin, and you can see when we wipe away, we're getting these sort of results. I've had the question asked to me many times why people's ink is not sticking, or why their lines aren't coming out clean, and why they don't look full and dark. And this could be the reason why. On this first line right here, I simply just went too fast for my needle to do anything to the skin, so therefore we have these sort of results. And on this line right here, I actually pressed down a lot harder, significantly harder than I did on this line, which resulted in a little bit darker of a line. However, you can still see that there's skips in this line. If I zoom in closer, this line right here actually has some points that are noticeable. So when I went down, it was pressed harder right here in this area and so forth. They kind of repeated that skip like process throughout that line right there. So here we have very inconsistent results with bad practices, and I'm going to kind of repeat that again so that way you can really see what I'm doing. So let's just say the lines from right here to right here, as soon as the needle touches. And I've seen a lot of tattoo artists tattoo in this manner, and in my head I'm just curious as to how they're getting clean lines. We also have to keep in mind that a tattoo may look good up front when it's freshly done. However, when it heals, if we are using this sort of technical application, then the results are definitely going to be less than desirable. So you can see very inconsistent results. The lines look like they've already aged quite a bit. So if you ever see tattoos that have like that sort of faded age look, the artist, chances are they may not have been familiar with where the ink should be deposited, and or maybe what it feels like to deposit ink into the correct location in the skin. It had to have been something to this extent, and granted, those are just some of the variables out of all the possibilities that could be happening. But to my, or to, I guess in my theory, that's what I think is happening whenever we see tattoos with that age look. It's probably because the artist is a bit uninformed or ill-informed. You get the idea. So you can see I slowed down a little bit more right here, and we achieve a little bit more saturation. So when I first started, I remember I went through this exact process. So I started learning. I was like, so the slower I move, I could achieve a little bit more darker of a line. So then I started applying that logic, and then I just kind of went into the skin and then moved a little bit slower, and you get the idea. So although I'm not achieving a full consistent line, you can see though now I am getting more saturation, and I'm getting more darkness than what I have without having to press this hard. So I'm getting somewhere, and the idea is to get familiar with what improper tattoo practices are, and this is what they are. So you can see I'm just literally moving fast, and what's happening is I'm essentially damaging the skin at a faster rate while doing less work. So it's actually in reverse. If we're going to be tattooing this way, then we're going to be causing significant damage to the skin while depositing minimal ink, let alone doing anything on that tattoo design consistently. Let me wipe away so we can see the full results here. And for me personally, I do not see one consistent clean line right here, and I'm sure everyone watching could agree with what I am saying. There is not one clean consistent line. I know that this one may look semi-decent, but it's not. When we turn in certain angles, you can see those skipping points, and you can still see how light that is. All of these lines right here have that aged look to them already, and they are fresh. We just tattooed them. This is not what we want. I'm sure at this point we're probably asking ourselves, well, how do we get clean, consistent, saturated lines? Now, for me, there was a turning point that helped me figure out where I need to be depositing ink, and let alone how I could align my hand speed and voltage. And instead of pulling lines, I took it down to dots. So I'm going to use just the very tip of this 14 round shader. You can do this with any needle size that you have on your end. I would just recommend staying away from 5 round liners and below. Try to do this with a 7 round liner on up. Now, what really was pivotal for me within my tattooing journey was finding the way the needle behaved and catched. So there is a way when we tattoo that the needle behaves. So the needle, when we input it into the skin, we have to give it time to do its job. We have to give it time to catch, so to speak. And by that, what I mean is, I'm going to demonstrate with dots. So let's just say if I hit the skin with the needle like so. Although we do get some sort of tattoo marking, this isn't anything that is of value or represents something to a client. Even a dot would need to be saturated, complete, symmetrical. You get the idea. But however, we can see the needle markings right there. So when I put the needle into the skin, it was catching onto the skin. However, I didn't give it enough time to completely catch. Does that make sense? Allow me to demonstrate a needle catching. So if I get comfortable, I can do it this way as well. I still tattoo both ways with my finger like this and this. For those who are curious, I do use both methods. So I'm gonna give the needle time to catch. So as you can see, it was in there significantly longer. However, I'm achieving darker results. Don't think that as soon as we put the needle onto the skin, we're causing significant damage, because that's anticipation, I feel, and we're anticipating something that only, I guess we're anticipating theoretical ideas, and that's not what we want. We want to stay away from that. So you want to get comfortable with the gear that you're using. Get comfortable with the needle catching. Don't press down too hard at all. Like, we're not trying to drive the needle into the skin like that. That's not what we're doing here. What we're doing is we're using just the very tip of the needle, and we're letting it catch. And what I'm doing is I'm seeing how long it takes for the needle to provide me with and produce a clean dot like that. And that's the idea behind it. So you can kind of see that it does take a little bit of time for the needle to actually catch onto the skin and begin doing its job. So the idea that we need to enter the skin and move as quickly as possible essentially was debunked for me when I found this out right here. This was, again, a pivot moment for me in my tattooing journey. Turns out this was a very big moment for me within my tattooing journey. Knowing this right here and how the needle behaves, how the needle catches within the skin, was everything for me. And I feel passing on this information to you can help you on your end, especially if you're struggling to get clean, consistent lines. I would recommend doing this exercise over and over until you're aware of how the needle catches, until you're producing clean, saturated, consistent dots without having to press down hard at all. Granted, we're going to apply a natural amount of pressure, but we are not going to drive this into the skin. So you can see that if you leave it on a little bit longer over others, it catches on a little bit more. And the more that it catches, the more that it's saturating that little dot. Now, we kind of want to start doing this and developing like a gauging system on how long we can leave the needle in the skin before it actually starts causing damage that we need to be concerned about, because every single tattoo is damage to the skin. We're literally cutting the skin open, so there is a certain level of damage that we do not want to cross, which is why you kind of want to avoid just, that's not what we're doing here. We're not using pressure to achieve these dots, we're using time. So you can see I'm leaving it there. I can even move in a little circle should I want to kind of put the ink in there a little bit more. And as you can see, I'm starting to achieve consistent dots. And granted, this is just dots. However, this is going to translate into the next part of this video. This is something that you want to practice on your end. You can do this along with me if you want to as well. I highly recommend doing so. But you can see the more that I'm understanding how the needle's catching, the cleaner the more saturated my dots are getting. I'm not going for perfection. All I'm focused on right now is how the needle catches. That is it. I would highly recommend to do this as many times as you want on your end, so that way you get a good idea as to how the needle behaves, how it catches, so you can get an idea of what it's like to achieve saturation without pressure, without too much pressure. Because granted, I am just applying a natural amount of pressure, but as soon as I feel that needle tip going to work, I stop applying pressure and I kind of let time do its thing. And you can see the needle's actually catching. I am going to switch on over to a better angle with a different camera here, so that way you can see the needle imprint catching at a higher quality. I'm going to switch on over to this angle here, so that way I can try to get a better angle and demonstrate a little bit better as to what the needle looks like when it's catching. So again, I'm just using the very tip of the needle. I'm exerting a little pressure, and you can see how the tip of the needle starts imprinting the line weight onto the skin. After we leave it in there a certain amount of time, there you go, you can see the needle start catching and doing its thing. And that right there is what I'm trying to demonstrate on. That is what we want to do. That's what we want to get comfortable with, this little variable right here. So you can see the needle tip is being created, giving it a little bit more time, create the entire little dot that we need. Granted, I have inadequate ink flow right now, so this should be happening a bit more immediate. So if you start seeing that, then you're going to need more ink. But I wanted to try to leave some ink out so that way you can see the actual configuration of the needle doing its job. So you can see the more that I'm doing this, the more that I'm practicing the needle catch, the more that I'm understanding it actually takes a little bit of time for the needle to do its job. I understand that we're just doing dots, but this is a crucial fundamental that I follow and I guess kind of like live by with tattooing, that allows me to pull clean, consistent lines. This is the main rule of thumb that I'm thinking about before I even start pulling a line. Before I knew about any of this, before I knew that the needle needed time to catch, my work was like this, and I was having to go back over and over and over and not do one pass lines. I was sculpting the lines at that point, simply because I didn't know that the needle has a certain amount of time that it goes into the skin and it needs to catch. It has a certain amount of time where it needs to catch, and then we could begin tattooing. I would recommend practicing that needle catch until you know it's second nature, until you know how much time your setup takes to input the ink. Keep in mind, this is going to be on fake skin, so the fundamentals and some variables will have to be tuned in correspondence to human skin. However, this is a great and fantastic starting point to fully understand what's required to pull a clean, consistent line. So repeat this as needed on your end. Once we're acquainted with needle catching, and once we get more familiar with how our gear catches, and once you do this a little bit more on your end, then I would recommend taking it to the next step and practicing smaller lines. So before, these were our results theoretically, understanding that the needle needs time to catch, and this was our practice. And then now we're going to put the practice to the test. So I'm going to use that logic. Instead of just doing it the way that I was before, where I was just like that, I'm going to apply the logic of giving the needle time to catch. So we're going to repeat that here. And again, you can do this any way. I'll do it the older way that I used to do it. Give the needle time to catch. And then now I'm moving at a steady and consistent hand speed, or a steady and consistent rate that aligns with my hand speed and voltage. Keep in mind, I'm running at 7.5 volts, so your speed in terms of how fast you go from A to B is going to vary a little bit more, but for me, comfortably, to achieve nice, clean, consistent results, I'm going to be moving at around this speed right here, because the way that the needle catch, it needs to do that throughout the entire line. So that's how we're going to get clean, consistent results. We need to allow the needle to do its job when we input it into the skin. So let's just say if I choose to go a little bit faster on this one, on this line versus the other line, we're going to notice the difference once I wipe. So you can see when I wipe, that first clean line right there stayed in there completely. The integrity is true to when I put it in. This line right here, I'm going to have to double up on this part. Next, I would have to go back and then double up on this line, because I chose to kind of speed it up right there when I shouldn't have. It has to be at the same consistent rate. And this is tuning your hand speed and voltage. Once you fine tune your hand speed and voltage, don't fluctuate too much from your hand speed and voltage. That's your hand speed, and voltage for your setup. So I would recommend getting comfortable not only with learning how the needle behaves and catches into the skin, get comfortable fine tuning your hand speed and voltage. One thing that I want to point out is that this is a 4mm stroke, if I am correct. If I remember correctly, the Prophet is a 4mm stroke, which has a harder hit. Also keep in mind that the stroke that you are using, and again, going back to being comfortable and knowing your gear, the stroke that you are using is also going to determine how easy your machine is going to input ink into skin. For example, the Prophet T100 has a harder hit because of that 4-stroke, as opposed to this Ink Claw Tiny Tattoo machine. As if I'm correct, this one's going to be a 3.5mm stroke. However, if you align your technical application, you can still get clean results with either or. You just have to adjust in correspondence to the gear that you are using. So here is the Ink Claw Tiny Tattoo pin, and I'm using the Mummy wireless tattoo or wireless power supply, and I'm hanging out my needle quite a bit here. And I'm going to show you that if we have the technical application aligned, we could still pull clean, consistent lines with whatever gear that we're choosing to use, which confirms being comfortable and knowing our gear is important. So right here, I have my machine running at 7 volts even. This power supply pushes a little bit harder. Make sure I have adequate ink flow. Same rule of thumb, give the needle time to catch, and then go from point A to B as I normally would. And you can see I'm still getting clean, consistent, saturated lines. Nothing really changes in terms of technical application. What is changing is my hand speed and voltage. I'm simply tuning it to the gear that I'm using now. But this is a completely different stroke. It even feels a lot softer than the Prophet T100. However, I can still get clean results all the way through. So if I were doing this and not allowing the needle to catch, and I kind of just pull through, I would assume that this machine is just weak. It doesn't have a hard hit. This machine doesn't work. You kind of get the idea, and maybe that actually happens to people. They draw their opinions from user error, but you can kind of get the idea. You want to give that needle time to catch before we start moving it anywhere. Doesn't matter if we're using a tiny tattoo machine or a fatter machine like the Prophet T100. You can see that the results are still achievable with either or, and I can't tell the difference what machine was what if I were to look at it and not know what machine I used. So understanding that we need this needle to catch in order for us to start achieving clean, saturated lines, we're going to take that fundamentals into our tattoo designs. Just keep in mind real quick before we move on and advance to the next part of this video, you need to give your needle time to catch. So I look at it as like a slope type of deal, like a little half pipe type of thing, where I'm going in and I let the needle catch, which is breaking into the skin. Once I've broken into the skin, I kind of drag it over the area of the skin that I'm going to be tattooing, and I give it time to do its job. That is the fundamental idea behind it. So that's how you go about getting clean, consistent lines. Now, granted, we are talking about saturation and inputting ink into the skin. I'm not talking about visible wobbly lines or anything like that just yet. We can cover a lot of those aspects in a different video. For this video, I want to cover the aspect of how is it even possible to get the ink into the skin in a saturated manner without causing damage. And the answer to that, I feel, would be to understand how long it takes for your needle to catch, and then from there aligning your hand speed and voltage, so that way you are applying the best possible cleanest lines you can apply to your clients. I could repeat this all day, but rather than repeating this over and over and showing you little lines, let's get into an actual tattoo design, and we're going to go back to this mandala that we started with at the beginning of the video. So I'm going to start with the same area that I would if this was a real tattoo, from the bottom, kind of work my way on up. I feel that that is a healthy approach. And for me, I'm going to run through all of the checklists. I'm going to make sure that I have adequate ink flow. So I'm dipping back to make sure that I have adequate ink within my needle cart there. I'm going to make sure that my position is comfortable, and I'm going to figure out the best possible way that I can move to get from point A to point B to apply the cleanest line that I could apply. I'm going to acknowledge the area that I want to start tattooing, and then I'm going to go from there. Same rule applies. I'm going to want to give my needle time to catch before I proceed to pulling these lines here. So I'm going to begin, locate the spot that I'm going to tattoo, and then from here I'm going to do my best to pull my line from point A to point B as best as I possibly can. So I'm going to make sure I input, I need my needle to catch, and then from there I'm just simply going to guide the needle following the stencil as best I can. If I make mistakes, it's okay. I'm not going to really focus on them too much. That's perfectly fine. So you can see I'm semi-uncomfortable with this line. However, we still achieve nice clean results. This is still a nice saturated line. It's actually not bad at all. And I'm going to continue that logic throughout the design here. Even if we were to wipe, you can see that the line is true. It's staying there. We're not losing any ink or getting any patchiness. Apply the same method right here. And if you're comfortable holding your machine like this, the way that I am, you can do that. You can hold it like this. However you hold it on your end. I also have various videos talking about that. I'm going to start from A to B, acknowledging my points, and then from there give the time, or give the needle time to catch, and then just allow it to catch all the way through. Like so. For me personally, having a plan, knowing where I'm going to go is everything for me. So that provides me with a lot of comfort and ease when I'm tattooing. Tattooing could be a really stressful thing. It can make us nervous at times, especially if we're going to be winging tattoos and not know what we're doing. So you get the idea. So I'm going to repeat that all the way through, and essentially that's the process behind it to get clean, consistent lines, is to make sure that you let your needle catch. And of course, make sure that your posture, your holding position, and all of that is comfortable in a manner that you are comfortable with. Make sure my needle catches. I feel it catch right there. And I know what it feels like when the needle catches because I spent time practicing doing those dots earlier that we saw in the video. See, so right here, went a little bit outside the stencil, but again, I'm not going to get focused on that. And you can see that's quite a bit right there. But at the end of the day, I made that mistake. So, for example, the skin kind of went up a little bit, deterred my original movement. I'm going to go back and I'm just going to kind of correct this as best as I can. On a real client, it would have happened a little bit differently because, granted, we are at the edge of this fake skin, which gives it a little bit more lift in certain areas of tattooing. I don't want to get fixated on any mistakes that I make, as that's going to deter me and discourage me for the rest of the tattoo. If I fixate on this, the rest of the tattoo choices are going to be made based around this one mistake, and I don't really want to feel like that throughout my tattoo sessions. So I need to trust the fundamentals. I need to trust that I know what I'm doing. So for this time, I'm just going to put a little bit more pressure on the skin and stretch it out just a little bit more so that way I can get more of a firm hold on the skin. That's how I'll counteract that from happening. Problem solve. Like so. Dab away. Very nice clean line. Same thing over here. I'm just going to repeat this process, and this is going to be with pretty much any needle configuration. It doesn't really, the fundamentals don't change because the needle size does. The fundamentals stay the same. The only thing that really changes is the needle size itself. So you can see I'm moving at a healthy hand speed and voltage that's healthy for me and my setup. I'm comfortable with what I am doing, and I'm comfortable with the gear that I'm using. Therefore, we can see it in the results right here. All the way through. I'm gonna hold it down as best I can. This one may be a little tough to tattoo. However, if I take my time with it, we should be able to tattoo this. So right here, the skin's lifting up, feeling uncomfortable, so I'm just going to go ahead and taper out right there. I'm not able to pull this line all in one go, and you can see as it started lifting, we started showing some inconsistencies there, and that's what I want to stay away from at all costs when I'm tattooing. I'm going to try and figure out another approach, a better way to approach tattooing this, and I'm going to taper back in from a little bit above the line here. Just very surface level touching here, and then now I'm starting to let the needle catch back into the skin. This is a very uncomfortable spot to tattoo, very unstable as you can see. Skin bouncing everywhere. I just stayed consistent as I possibly could to apply it as best I can. For the way that it was wobbling, I didn't experience too bad of a line. However, this is not what we want. This is still not good tattooing right here. So I'm going to go ahead and go back this way over this line. So to avoid stuff like this from happening, you kind of want to put some thought into the tattoo. Put some thought into what is more comfortable for you. Which way would you prefer to move over another? So that right there, if I would have thought about it a little bit more, I could have prevented from having to go over this line 3 different times. And I'm going to do the same thing for here. I'm going to feel comfortable pulling it towards me, so I'm going to do that. Let the needle catch. You can feel it catch, and then when it does catch, just leave it in that area, in that kind of caught state, until you get to your point of interest, so to speak. I'm definitely not mad at this area for it being this corner. I'm happy with those results. From my experience, tattooing fake skin on their corners is one of the most tedious things that I've ever had to tattoo, just because of all the bounce I experience. It's not really practical, so I don't really get too mad at that area. So I'm going to go over here, and then I'm going to continue this process, and I'm just going to kind of demonstrate here for you all. Make sure that I always have adequate ink flow, so every other line, depending on how long it is, I'll go ahead and dip back into it. I felt like I sped up a little bit there, so my line may have came out a little fainter in a certain area. And these are little things that we want to pay attention to when we are tattooing, and I sure did right here in this area. You can see that it's a little bit lighter over the other areas because I sped it up right there a little bit, and that's what we see. It's not necessarily a bad thing. For me personally, if this was on human skin, I'm going to leave it like that, as opposed to try to double up and make this little part more thicker. I'm going to leave it like that because the line weight integrity is still there. We didn't lose any integrity from a nice saturated line. However, that one could have just been more saturated in my opinion. So you get the idea. You always want to pay attention to your hand speed and voltage and how fast you're moving from A to B. Make sure you're giving time for that needle to penetrate and catch. like so. And this is the process that we're going to repeat until the tattoo's done, or until we've lined the entire tattoo. So my logic is I'm acknowledging the points that I want to tattoo, and then I'm trying to go from A to B to tattoo those areas. Taper in right here, and right around here is where the needle's catching. And I'm going to follow this as best as I can. So there we go. Now for those who are wondering if this is causing damage to the skin, now it's going to vary. It's hard to say. For my specific application, this is the way that I've tattooed, and this is the way that I do tattoo, and this is the way that I've achieved the best results when tattooing. So it's going to really vary from artist to artist. If an artist is using a coil using this same application, then they may end up chewing up the skin in the long run. So it's hard to say what's right and wrong when it comes to tattoo artists. You kind of have to watch them for yourself and see how the results come out. So again, I'm always going to let my needle catch, take my time, give it time to catch before I start moving on to the next part. I want to remain as consistent as I possibly can. As you can see, over and over again, I'm achieving very similar results. All these lines are looking nice and cohesive and neighborly towards one another, for lack of a better term, but they all look nice and consistent. The line weights don't fluctuate. And you can notice that I changed my position to this position simply because I'm on a curved area. It just feels more natural to do it this way for me. And another one. And then from here I would repeat this process with every single line on the design. The fundamentals do not change. I'm always going back to the basics, especially when I'm doing complex designs and there's a lot of lines involved. It's literally just going back to the basics, taking my time from point A, allowing the needle to catch, and then tapering out to point B. And then the same thing with the other lines. Like so, all the way through until the tattoo is completed. Then I'm going to repeat that on this side, and it's all going to be the same even with these thicker line weights as well. And I think the idea of it is finding that hand speed and voltage and really understanding how long it takes for your setup to catch into the skin. I feel like those are very important variables to think about when we are applying these lines. You'll notice every single line I'm doing, I'm letting the needle catch before I move on. So here we go, the beginning, catch, guide, release, on to the next. I don't want to rush either. I don't want to make up any stencil as I go. I want to try to stay true to it as I possibly can. As you saw earlier, mistakes will be made. but I'm doing the best that I absolutely can while still achieving pretty decent results. Let's say I need to do this right here. There's two ways we could approach this. We can either outline it and fill it in should we not have a configuration of this size, or if you have a configuration that matches that thick of a line width, you can simply use that. So for this, I'm going to use the Ink Claw 111 round shader, so that way I could input these lines with one go. Here we have the Ink Claw 111 round shader. I want to make sure that I have good adequate ink flow, so that way all 111 needles are getting input into the skin. Now this is going to require a bit more of a catch time due to the needle size. So you can see I'm going to, let me make sure I'm on camera for this one. So see, I'm going to place the needle in right here, give it time to catch, and then I'm going to move it along as best as I possibly can. And I want to move at a slow, steady, consistent pace, so that way it catches the way that it's catching, so that way all 111 needles catch. And I also have to go back for a little bit more ink because this is depositing a lot more ink, so we're going to need to make sure that that ink flow is correct, especially when we're dealing with larger configurations. Go back in from above a little bit to taper in. Like so, as best as I possibly can get these lines. And as you can see, we're achieving nice, clean, saturated results here. If you need to double up, feel free to do so. I can go ahead and easily manipulate this area right here without causing tremendous damage to the skin. And that's one way that we can go about tattooing thicker line areas right here. And that's how I can go about getting nice, clean lines with thicker needles. I always give the needle time to catch. That's the most important thing, giving the needle time to do its job. And behaviors from larger configurations to smaller definitely do change, as you see here. However, I'm sticking to the same fundamentals where I give the needle time to catch, and then from there I work the needle as best as I can. Same thing all the way through. I'm going to do my best to saturate this line right here with these cameras all in the way. And I'm just going to keep the same fundamental approach here. Hopefully I can remain in focus on this one right here. It's going to be a little bit rough on this edge right here, but it's okay. It's the corner of fake skin. I'm going to let the needle catch as best I can to that corner. And then once I feel the needle catching, that's when I begin to tattoo the line. Now the skin was popping up a little bit right there, which is why I went ahead and I tapered out. And then I'm going to continue to start from the top a little bit and then just continue this line until it's complete. Just like so. So let's do it again with this line right here. And then you're going to notice that no matter if I'm using 111 needles or if I'm using 14 needles, my fundamental still stays the same. I have to let that needle catch before I begin working on the area that I'm tattooing. So I'm going to try to keep it focused. So I'm tattooing in a very awkward position here. Put the needle there, let it catch in there. And as I'm letting it catch, I'm also like tapering in a little bit, so that way I don't have hard points where I start and stop. And I couldn't tattoo it all in one go because the skin started going up, so that's not practical. Skin's raising up a little bit. Gotta give that needle time to catch in the right areas. If we're not tapering in from the right areas, it's possible that we're gonna get inconsistent lines. But as you can see, we still got a nice, clean, saturated line there. For these spots right here, I do feel like the Stigma standard 5-round liner would fit well there. So we're going to use that in that area right there. And the fundamentals, again, stay the same. I'm simply going to get my setup comfortable to my liking. Since I'm using a smaller configuration, one that's easier to break the skin open, I'm going to take it down from 7.5 volts to about 6 volts. Feels pretty safe for me. That feels healthy, and it sounds healthy as well. And then I'm going to continue the basics. I'm going to find my A to B, make sure I have adequate ink flow, make sure my positioning is comfortable, and then I'm going to make sure that this needle catches. Even though it's smaller, it still needs to catch. So I'm going to give this needle time to catch, but you'll notice that since it is a smaller configuration, it'll catch much easier. I'm going to taper in right here, and then I gave the needle time to catch right here in this area. And I remained in the area where it caught, and I kind of break the skin open in correspondence to the design. So the stencil is telling me to break the skin open here to deposit ink in this area right here. So that's exactly what we did. And you can see we got a nice line there. Now I'm going to continue that with the other side right here. So there we go. Even smaller needle configurations still need time to catch. We still need to give them time, let them do their thing. Don't rush that process. Don't rush that catching process. Just adjust to each and every single needle that you are using. So right here in this little area right here, we can use like a 14 round shader should we choose to do so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow these leaf lines right here. I'm going to input those, giving it time to catch, dragging it through the design. Moving at a steady, consistent pace there. Like so. If you can't see, I'm terribly sorry about that. I'll try to implement as many different angles as I possibly can for you all. Turns out it's actually really hard to record and tattoo at the same time. I let the needle catch each and every time. That's like one thing I don't rush at all. I have to let it catch to achieve that sort of result. In terms of stability and all of that, that's a whole other video that we can talk more about on stable practices. This is more on the technical aspect on what's required to pull clean, consistent lines. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use this 5-round liner and just run through the middle of all of these. I feel like that would work well as well. So we have that there. Let the needle catch. And I'm going to repeat that over and over and over because that's exactly what's happening. You got to let those needles catch. You got to let them do their job for you. Also note, the smaller you go in configuration size, the more you're going to see your mistakes. So if you're trying to avoid these sort of imperfections, then go with something thicker than a 5-round liner, because a 5-round liner, you're going to see every single imperfection. Even with longer lines, I'm going to approach it the same way. You can get comfortable, let the needle catch, and do its thing along the way. And then end it with the taper out up there. And we pulled a decent line there. We'll zoom in all the way. Since there's a bit more curves here, I'm going to approach it in a manner that feels most comfortable to me. And that's going to be right here. Actually, let's do it like this. There we go. Longer line right there. Let it catch in this area. And I'm just gonna keep it there and pull it across. Forgive me for the thunder, there is a storm happening right now. But as you can see, we did achieve another clean, saturated line. And keep in mind, this is a 5-round liner, so every imperfection I make is going to show drastically with this small of a needle configuration. Let the needle catch right here into the corner of the skin. Now also keep in mind, when we're pulling lines with needles, even if we're using the same needle configuration to create all of these lines, if we're pressing down more in certain areas over others, that can also change your needle size. So you also want to be careful with that. We actually don't have many lines to go here, so I'm just going to do a few more on camera with you all. Didn't really want this video to run on long, however, I feel like the more that I record, the more value you'll get for your watch. just gonna do these spots as well with the 14 round shader. It makes sense. I'm gonna start with a spot that I dislike the most, which is the end of this fake skin. So as you can see, that's right there. That right there is a direct result of inadequate ink flow. Didn't have enough ink to make it from A to B, which is something that we also want to avoid. Always give that needle time to catch. And that's probably like one of the most important tips I can give you here throughout this video, is to let that needle catch. Let that needle really do its work. Really use your eyes and adjust accordingly. Don't anticipate that you're gonna know what the needle's gonna do. Use your eyes and kind of just walk yourself through it practically. Mistakes will always be made along the way. I think how we handle them is what makes us a professional, and I think how we fix them, should it need fixing, is what makes us a professional. That right there, the skin's kind of moving on me. I'm not really too harsh. I don't judge myself too harshly on these corners right here. It is what it is. I'm not gonna get caught up and fixate on that area, because it's just kind of hard to be practical with these corners. And you'll notice that I didn't really talk much about pressure throughout this video, because that's not an important variable that I'm always considering when I'm pulling lines. Pressure is not always on my mind. What is on my mind is getting comfortable with understanding how the needle behaves, understanding that now the needle has broke into the dermis and I am now depositing ink into the dermis. I think that that is a lot more valuable than using pressure, in my opinion, and that's just how I'm going about lining. I don't really rely on pressure. I more so rely on my hand speed and voltage and how much time I leave in the skin. I leave the needle in the skin. And you can see every line is consistent and saturated, just like the one to the next of it. Again, these edges, can't take them too serious. Just try your best if you are tattooing on the edge of a fake skin. Here we have the tattoo all lined up, and in my opinion, I love the way that it came out. It was very difficult to work in these cornered areas. However, the entire tattoo overall was very fun to do, and you can see that from afar, from a top view, it reads really well. All of the imperfections aren't really pronounced and they're not really sticking out to us. So therefore, I'm very happy with the results and readability of this tattoo right here. These are the results. This is what I am working with. From here, what I would do is simply start adding the dot work where I want to add the dot work, and the shading where I want to add the shading. Before this one, this video is going to be based around the lines. As you can see, we achieved some pretty decent results right here. Now, that'll conclude this video. I do hope that I was able to help you in a better direction, or at the very least, by now, I hope that you can take something with you that you can practically apply immediately on your end. Should you have any questions about anything that you saw or heard throughout this video, I'm going to encourage you to drop a comment down below. I will do my absolute best to assist you in the best possible direction. I also have social medias under the same name as his YouTube channel. I have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. I would truly appreciate your support over there as well. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button for me and ring that bell, as I will be bringing more videos like this for you all. If you found this video helpful and enjoy my content, consider becoming a Patreon or sending over a super thanks, as I would truly appreciate your support. With that being said, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate your time. You have a great day.